Okay, so I've decided to combine the PowerPoints or the material for Chapter 9 and 10 together into sort of a single PowerPoint presentation that I'm just going to call Print. But I'm going to reverse the order. The way your textbook presents it, Chapter 9 is magazines, Chapter 10 is books, yet chronologically books came first. So I'm going to include just a fundamental outline of the chapter's content of this, and there'll be significant portions I will skip over because I do have two of these to get through together, um, and then some parts where I may or may not elaborate on. So let us dive in. Let's get this out of the way. You don't need to see that. And okay. So now we're going to first move into a discussion of the history of books and some of the early precursors of books as we know it today, and certainly the development of papyrus in Egypt, and you can see how long ago that was. I actually have a piece of art painted on papyrus, and so it's an interesting form of art form that it was back then in terms of the earliest form of print and when literacy first began. And there's actually some scholars who argue in terms of papyrus being created in China. And then, of course, parchment, which was basically animal skin that replaced the use of papyrus, particularly in Europe. And then we have the codex, which is this idea of a proto-modern book and this bound material that was used in the Roman Empire. Then we came into what was considered a manuscript culture, the textbooks, or rather any books, any manuscripts, became the property of the elite. Most predominantly it was state government officials, the ruling family, people in that type of industry, and religion very much became the holders of books. And then it went on to, history goes on to talk about this notion of when block printing came about, the idea of movable type, which was around the era when Johannes Gutenberg came up with his infamous invention, and of course you're going to see a lengthy video on the Gutenberg press and the profound, absolutely profound impact that that invention had on human society. From that point on, radically changed everything. People nowadays have a very difficult time understanding how significant the printing press was, but well, first of all, before literacy, before even the use of the alphabet and the creation of the alphabet, which was actually developed by the Phoenicians in Greece, but prior to that, truth was in the spoken word. It was as one person spoke to another, and their word was law, and you put a lot of credence in an individual's words and in a handshake. But with the onset of the alphabet and soon with print, it had to be in writing, and truth became external. It was no longer an internal quality. So anyway, it's just one of the many ways that Gutenberg's invention has such a profound effect on human society. Other things that continued on in terms of the discussion of history in your book, you have a discussion of the publishing industry, and you can go to the textbook for details there, and the publishing houses that go along. By the way, I've decided to omit many of the charts and graphs from this PowerPoint that are in your book. They're very helpful. I do include one of them here, but which you'll see shortly. But go to the textbook for details on that. And speaking of books, there are a variety of different types of books. You can certainly have trade books, both for adult and juvenile or kid populations, and of course the idea of comic books or graphic novels. Then there are professional books that can deal with a particular industry, textbooks, which you are probably very familiar with, mass market books, which sometimes is the idea of a novel has been sort of called this an idea of pulp fiction. Religious titles, references, university preference, or university press books, which are usually written on a very narrow topic to a very specific audience. This is the graph I decided to keep in the PowerPoint presentation just in terms of the estimated revenue within the U.S. Some of the other interesting graphs I really encourage you to go back and look at in the textbook are the revenue of a textbook. Where does the money go? If you spend, $20 on a book, where does that go? If you spend $80 on a textbook, where does that go? Who gets what percent? It's interesting, very interesting. And more recently, of course, we've had influences of television, film, and the concept of audiobooks. And certainly there are different aspects that those industries have influenced books, and you can go to the textbook again for details. Most importantly and significantly, more relevant to us is this idea of books in the digital age and this idea of an e-book. And I'm not sure how many of you have read textbooks on some type of device or reader. I would suspect the large majority of you have. I'm not sure how many of you prefer it. There is something for me about having to have the actual book in front of me. I am a bookaholic, and like some people might have to be careful of how much beer they consume or wine they drink. I have to be very careful about my reading because I can just go crazy with it. Anyway, so some great, interesting information in your textbooks about the future of ebooks, where they suspect that will be going, and it's very much about adapting to the particular person who's on the other side of the screen and adapting and meeting those needs. So in some ways that might creep certain people out, but nonetheless. Some advantages to this digitization is the idea of preservation, which is really fascinating. Sort of a very short story. For my dissertation, I ended up going to Oxford, England to do research, and I was allowed down in what is called the stacks of Oxford Library. And the stacks is very hard to get into. I'm really not sure how I got access, but there I was. And the stacks is a series of basements below Oxford University, their library, and we're talking hundreds, if not thousands, of rows of books, very, very, very ancient books. It's a very dimly lit place with a smell that's very hard to envision. So if you can picture yourself in a dusty basement with rows upon rows upon rows of ancient, ancient books. I remember I was in one row, and the books I was looking for were all in the 1800s. But I stopped by and was pulling books off the shelf that were written in the 1700s, and it was just amazing, absolutely amazing, and thought how terrifying it would be if a match were to light up in a place like that. How tragic. So this there's a lot of information, or a lot of this idea of digitizing these textbooks to preserve them, and one of the advantages of the era that we live in nowadays. The idea of censorship, I'm going to have you check out some banned books in, I think, the discussion board, and I think you'll enjoy that. Different ownership patterns, that has a lot to do with specific companies that own different publishers and the percentage that they own worldwide. And again, go to the textbook for details. In terms of the structure of publishing, if it's a career choice you're looking to get into, your textbook gives you some great information describing some of the different job responsibilities of different roles within the publishing industry. In terms of selling books, you've got a contrast between the traditional book and mortar type bookstore and your online version, and some interesting, again, I'm going to say it's all interesting, material regarding those particular entities and how they work together. Oops, I lied. I guess I did include another graph. So here we have this idea of market share of reader tablets and who's got what, and of course Apple has the largest piece of the pie. Alternative voices, the idea of the traditional public library and their role. This newpages.com is trying to, it's a web source. You might want to go check it out and see about the content that they have at that particular website. You might find it very interesting and definitely a little bit outside the box, not quite so mainstream. And in terms of the future of democracy, interesting research that suggests that Americans are reading more, and there's been a distinct correlation between literacy and democracy. So, and the next aspect that we'll go to, that's predominantly the book section, is we'll hit up the magazine section next, but I think I'll do that in a separate video.